Hello, everyone. Welcome to Candid Conversations, real people, real stories, real impact, a podcast from 120 under 40, the new generation of family planning leaders, where we talk about family planning and reproductive health and champions from around the globe, and take a deep dive into current topics in family planning and reproductive health, as well as the personal journeys of our family planning champions and the challenges they face and what excites them about the future, as well as what advice they have for other up-and-coming leaders. We are thrilled to welcome you back for episode 12, where we meet two of our 2021 Ingenuity Fund winners, Barwani and Nissily, and discuss their project. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. The link will be in the description of the podcast, and be sure to hit that notification button to be the first to know about upcoming episodes. Without further ado, I'll allow our guests to introduce themselves and their exciting Ingenuity Fund project. Welcome, Barwani and Nissily.
Right. Thank you very much, Jordan, for having us on this podcast. My name is Nissily Mushani, and for our Ingenuity Fund, we actually, together with my colleague, Barwani, she'll actually come in and introduce herself. The work that we're looking at, this is focusing in Malawi. We actually designed our project to be working with adolescent and young mothers in the peri-urban area in Lilongwe. That is the central region Malawi, but that is also the capital city of Malawi. The reason we actually thought about this is that when you look at Malawian young women, adolescents, the young mothers, they've already initiated sex at this point. Actually, the sex ed in Malawi is also at a very young age. But usually when it comes to sex education, but also their sex experiences, usually it's full of negative experiences. But also it shows that most of them, they would actually initiate sex, but they do not understand what sex is, but also issues to do with sexuality. So our program actually wants to work around that. Of course, we have sex education, which is being provided, but then the part that most often is not talked about is about the sexuality, but also the pleasure linked to sex. Usually this education will be about, if you have sex, this is what is going to happen. Usually there's that just negative messaging around it. Over to you, Barwani.
So as Nissily was talking about it, I think just to emphasize some things is that whenever part of our program or our project is really asking the question is, within the sex and the narrative and choice, where does the pregnant and mothers who are adolescent girls fit in? Because we find that every time you table a conversation around sex, choice, and the story, they're always centered to, you shouldn't have, this is a burden, why did you? Where is your agency? Why didn't you act? It's always that society is looking down at it on a blame. And when we look at young women that are peri-urban, so peri-urban is unique in its nature because these are people that are in urban areas, but that are highly densely populated and they're underserved. And what we see is these are the same girls that 1 out of 6 become pregnant before they're 16, but also that nearly in 1 of every 5 births is a repeat birth. But however, even when we look at this, I think sometimes as people who can share experiences, we only look at the figures, we don't understand the underlying factors. And recognizing, as Nissily said, that Malawi in the past couple of years has looked at its comprehensive sexuality education and asked itself to say, is how it's designed, making sure that young people have the skills to pause, to ask themselves to say, yes, I can have sex. But how do I come to have sex in a way that I can decide that is when I want to have it? Is it pleasurable? How do I make it more pleasurable? How do I negotiate sex? So these things have been like stakeholders have pulled into them. But I think what we find that is a gap is that given that this population there's a spotlight here, and this is also coupled for issues like around gender violence and HIV, and they have the highest need to want to use contraception, but they're not using it. So I think the question we had is, we see what the impact is, and we've worked and we've seen the gap, but how do we build in almost the momentum that's already there to make sure that as we do, we adjust the path, but that we let the adolescent girls and young mothers who are either pregnant or have a child to really say, we think if we could pause when we're doing CSC, or if I knew this is where we'd start, would help. So I think that's why the question or the guiding is a learning moment, and also to ask to say, do young women see themselves when we talk about comprehensive sexuality? Where do they see themselves? Where would they like to ground it? And how do we change that to start from a pleasure-informed approach and it be positive and not it be negative? So I think if we were to look at the driving force of our program, that's what drives us. But also to, as adding on, we said, from conversations we've had with adolescents and young mothers, it's also the stories that accompany their experience are always told from third person, fourth person. So there's a way in Malawi where I'll say this in vernacular and then I'll explain it in English. It says, warenga mimba, amupatsa mimba. What that means is you have taken pregnancy, or you've been, well, the word is, I'm not translating this right, but in short ways, it says you've been given. So it's almost assumes, like it blames the adolescent or young girls. But the point is, if you are an adolescent or a young woman, are we right in defining somebody for the choices we do not understand and for the circumstances? But we're not looking at who was involved on the other side. What was the environment? What could have stepped in? What could have changed? And then we've also seen adolescent girls and mothers like come on the front line, demonstrate what kind of support would be needed and would be tested. And we thought we could come together with them to do this at a scale where we bring other partners who have been invested in CSC, so that the lessons we learn from our work do not only inform our work, but actually inform stakeholders that we can work in the health sector and health delivery, but also those who do CSE with targeting with adolescent girls and young mothers. And one of the things we also want to see beyond then is that these are the decisions they can make from an informed place that they want to jump in. Because the fear and things we've heard is you people come in and you talk about contraception, but maybe the contraception, the first time I linked to it, I was being forced by my parents because they said I got pregnant when I was younger. So this was a forced experience. Or my first sex wasn't a pleasurable experience. So how do I jump to contraception when we've not resolved the issue in between? But also, just the peri-urban is characterized by sex being a taboo, discussing and knowing the body. So for this project, we wanted to go down to start at the best. I think sometimes we only look at the end and forget the best. And also ensuring that with this project, we can nurture and have fellow adolescent girls and young women that can take this and replicate, but also that we will have stories and those experiences taught and shared to say, have you guys considered this? So that the young women themselves pave their narrative their way. Thank you. Back to you, Jordan.
Thank you both. I love hearing about your project, quite honestly. And the excitement and kind of basis that you have formed your project around. And we are super excited to continue to follow it as it unfolds and as you start working with that storytelling portion and the influencers. Do you have kind of, what are you most excited about when it comes to your project when looking at the next few months?
Hey, thank you. For me, when we're actually discussing issues about the pleasure positive and safe sex, comprehensive sexuality education, then one of the outcomes of our project is about storytelling for impact. That part is what is exciting to me. Like as Barwani has pointed out, usually you hear stories about young mothers, the adolescent getting pregnant. usually the blame is just on them. And sometimes the way we do our programming, we don't understand what is going on. And the stories usually are being told in third person, the fourth person. But then with our program, once we get the girls themselves, they are, as much as like they're undergoing through the training, but the part of storytelling, that's to hear their own voices. That part actually excites me because it also builds around advocacy, but also showing policymakers or programmers that this is what these young girls actually see. This is their point of view, instead of just writing or showcasing this from somebody's angle. So that part, that is what, for me, I'm really looking forward to hearing the stories, but also seeing the stories being published countrywide, but also hopefully internationally.
Thank you. Barwani, do you have something you're most excited about when it comes to this project?
I think what I'm really excited to see is, I'm looking forward when it comes to December for people to pick up the newspapers and see a young woman telling their story their way and saying, this is what we would like you to think of than what you think of. So I really, to just add on to what Nissily said, but also I'm looking forward to our work being able to offer insights on what works with adolescent girls and young women who are mothers at this stage, so that we can tailor best the comprehensive sexuality education, but also looking at how pleasure positive can be centered in it, because we don't really quite do this. And I feel like this work is very unique, and we are making sure that we're working with several people that work at the stages of this. So I'm looking forward to really, having something concrete we can present to say, this is what our testing is showing. So the question would be, I think it works. So what do we do to build on it, and also bring people together to say, if we have this, can you scale it? Can you work around it? So I'm really looking forward to that.
I think it's really interesting you point out the pleasure positive aspect and how unique it is. When you both were thinking of submitting for the Ingenuity Fund and submitting this project, what made you take on that pleasure positive lens?
Right. So the pleasure positive part of it, when you take a copy of CSE, whether it's a workbook or it's a toolkit, usually the way it is actually framed, the way the messaging itself usually kind of makes, in as much as Barwani has pointed out, even discussing about sex is a taboo. So even the way the CSE tools that are given to young people, to the young mothers themselves, they usually, they have that negative messaging. Don't do sex. If you do sex, this is what is going to happen. That kind of putting a fear in someone else. But with what we've seen as evidence is showing, once the young girls start having sex, they are participating in sex, it's really hard. I should say that you cannot tell them to say, don't have sex, but how do we actually help them to say that in as much as in your life, you're going to have sex at some point, but how do we make this sex to be, to approach it in a positive way? We make it to be safer, but also on the other side, whereby they know that as they're learning with pleasure positive, but it's also about learning their bodies, their feelings, but also the agency. How do they actually act when they're with their partners, or once someone approaches them for sex, what are their options to them? But also apart from that, to say that it's not just about that you're going to actually contract STDs, or as you're having this sex, once you add the pleasure positive part of it, it's whereby you actually even giving them that messaging that they have the power to decide how they want their sex life to be. So for us, it's that part of saying, okay, we have the CSE tools that are given to them, the materials that are given to them. We know that we have people who are trained to actually train or pass on the message to the young people. But the way this messaging is put across, we would want that to actually change, to see, okay, once you actually bring in the pressure part of it, the pressure positive of it, how do even young people take up this messaging? Does it actually bring such positive impact in their lives at the end of the day? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So just hearing you both speak in this very short few minutes, it's very clear that you both are extremely passionate about the work that you do, especially working with young mothers and being able to have them have their voice, have a platform. I'm curious if you could take us back a little bit and take us kind of through your journey in the family planning and SRHR space, and kind of tell us a little bit of how you started in this family planning field and then how you've ended up here.
So yeah, my background, it's I am an economist by training, but when I started working my first job I was with the government, then I joined a unit, I should say, that was looking at population and development. And then by then, I think Malawi was trying to center family planning as part of the development agenda, not just a healthy issue. So I think in our section, even though it was development, for development economics, we literally took this up to say, when you're looking at the numbers, especially if you link this to demographic dividend as well, where we actually had to pick this up with advocacy, coming up with policies, but also working together with the Minister of Health. So when I started looking at this, but also going through literature, learning what other countries are doing, that's when the realization that, okay, family planning, it is not just a healthy issue, but it is also a development issue. So yeah, being in that sector and learning what could be done, the potential, the power that actually family planning could actually do or contribute to development in our country, that made me actually to build my passion up. So there was that part of, I remember having the first National Family Planning and Development Conference in Malawi. I was part of the team that actually put that together. I know Barwani was also there. So it was that kind, I'm an economist, and then I became excited to say, okay, with family planning, our country, a lot of things could change, because when you link it to once a young people or say couples have access to the kind of family planning that they really want, that they desire, it could mean a lot of things. For instance, reduction in the number of adolescent pregnancies. That means that the girls are able to actually continue with their education. But also it has, by the end of the day, there's the impact of managing our population growth for our country. So actually my passion comes from that side. Family planning and development. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think mine stems on, I would say, maybe looking back on it, I would say I come from a position of privilege, and let me break this down a little bit. So I recognize that when I look around me, and this is also just my side of the family, more my dad's side of the family, like I can compare. So when I looked at my sister's life and my cousin's life, they were both, so this would be the equivalent of going to high school in America or in other countries, but it's secondary school. This story repeated itself. You have two girls that are young, so they're either like 13, 14, you know, at that point where you start exploring, learning. Then you have one where they explored and they got pregnant. And from that pregnancy, sadly, because our environment does not offer or give an opportunity to offer second chances, what then happens is somebody's life is over. And I know that that seems like it's oversimplifying and generalizing it, but it means that most likely what used to happen is you get pregnant, your family washes their hands literally of you. They drop you off with the boys or man side of the family. This is usually layered up with some type of intimate partner violence, because one, the boy or the man is saying, I did not want this responsibility, brought it on me, or their family is also instigating some level of violence. But then this means the girl, because they're pregnant and they're in this situation, they're more likely to get pregnant again, but they do not have support. So this means even their skills for them to fully transition into adulthood is stopped. Even when the child is born, their opportunities are also almost limited. So I watched this, I think, as an adolescent girl and early 20s see it repeat and repeat itself. But the issue here is really just second chances, but also it begged the question to say, where do we intervene? How are we intervening? But I think the best for me for this was, one, young people are having sex. Young people will keep having sex. The environment, the process, the parents do not want to recognize and acknowledge that they're having sex. And we're not doing anything to inform that process. So this was then to say, then what type of information would be needed to ensure that people have the right information, that as they're discovering their bodies, they understand how their bodies work. They understand what sex, sexuality, but also relationships that thrives are. And to be able to be a catalyst for those second chances, but also recognizing those second chances so that a story we know should not keep repeating itself, but that we use the story and the scenarios and experiences to do better. So I think for me, I would say that's the best of, I think, where this started from. And I saw that it's, how do we build those positive attitudes? How do we move from a place of shame, a place of taboo, to saying, let's sit and talk about it? Because that one conversation or decision will make, for example, a parent, an auntie, a safe space, so that if I have unsafe sex, I can come and say, hey, Nissily, you know, on Friday, this happened. Can you help me? Not that when it happens, I come and hide it from Nissily. Then a couple of weeks later, something happened. And that space will be open enough that if I come, even to Debbie will be like, yes, let's discuss. Yes, maybe you can consider this. Let's try out your skill to negotiate. Let's try, why do you think you did it this way? Maybe how would this be better sex for you? So I think for me, it really comes from that scenario where I saw like the different path of maybe how my sister or myself turned out versus people I know that are family, and then saying it needs to stop somewhere. And why can't I be where it stops? And also maybe like be a match that helps like slowly lift that flame forward. Thanks.
I love that metaphor of being a match. So that leads me into my question that I was thinking of. So how have, throughout your careers, how have you been able to see impact and change, or what impact and change have you been able to see through your Ingenuity Fund project or through whatever other projects that you've been able to work on?
Looking back from when in my college days, I should say, there were discussions about sex, contraception, family planning was really kind of a taboo thing. I cannot recall ever at a moment whereby I had a discussion with an adult in my life about family planning or contraceptives growing up. Not even my parents, my aunties, or anyone. But right now, I feel like for Malawi, we've moved, we've evolved. There are a number of platforms whereby discussions about family planning are ongoing. We even have the youth-friendly health services, and there are a number of organizations. Even at community level, we have all these CPOs. There's a distribution of contraceptives, but also mostly in the youth clubs that young people are having, whereby this conversation are actually taking place. So I feel like Malawi has evolved from whereby you couldn't even discuss about this, but nowadays you can actually do that. But also apart from that, I feel like nowadays access, we are not yet fully there, but access to even contraception, family planning has actually improved and increased, because I know that nowadays young people, you could either walk into a pharmacy if you had the money to actually procure a condom if you needed one, but also through the youth-friendly health services, even in those facilities in the rural areas, young people are able to actually go there and then ask and talk to someone at some level about their needs. So yeah, I feel like over time we've improved, but also through our policies, there've been a number of discussions, but also policy changes, and also programming has changed so that the sector is trying, the health sector is trying to actually accommodate SRHR, even for the young people themselves, so that they are able to actually access and utilize.
And throughout your careers, do you have spaces that you have found have been really effective when it comes to advocating for youth access to sexual and reproductive health and rights?
So yes, and I think I will answer this in two parts. So I'll take it to the last point and just also come to this question. So overall, I would say if we are looking at Malawi from the 10 years and 5 years, I would actually pat people and everybody who's been in the sector on the back. I think so. Our indicators of space in Malawi were really ranked low. So sometimes I think when you've had, even in life, when we've had achievements, because you've moved, but maybe it's still, when you compare with others and not compare with your success and how hard it is to maintain that achievement, you think you haven't done more. So I feel like a lot, if we look holistically in Malawi, that's kind of the environment we are, where there's been tremendous push and link to position young people, sexual reproductive health and rights at the center of reproductive health and family planning conversations, but also interventions. And we've actually seen this because I'll jump to something that's very global and then go to something that's on the ground. So if you go to Malawi's FP, well, there's 2020, 2030 and moving, you find that at the niche or at the middle of that is young people. That's the driver. When you look at everything, young people are the driver. If you compare with what the use of contraception or knowledge was, that has actually also jumped in young people. Of course, a lot of those methods are short-term, but we're also seeing like a good percent that has improved on long-acting and reversible contraception. The core issue, I think, or key issue here is now to say, how do we focus on young people that are more likely to get pregnant, are more likely to be infected by HIV or be impacted by HIV, are more likely to have other layers of sexual reproductive health challenges on them? How do we tailor and target them better to do better? But I would say there is, to go back to what Nissily said, there is, I think, spaces that have been very, very helpful in Malawi. When the population and health focus was being made, it was being made to say, how do we tie the actions, investment, and policies together? So the point was, if we run this, we get the impact. How do we use it to go to our national budget to then say, how do we keep this in the budget, but start from the district level? Then how do we translate that into policy? Because if we're seeing something works, how do we move it? So we've seen how it's come from maybe Jordan walking into a room and saying, we should do this to everybody speaking that language. But now I think the time is, so now we've tried this, it's worked. How do we regroup to do it much more while appreciating the achievements, but now targeting those, unique population and missed opportunities? Because if we're saying you have a number of girls who get pregnant, it means those girls go to the clinic, they give birth. But the question is, when they go for antenatal, how is the family planning or contraceptive counseling included? How do we do postpartum family planning? Because those are the same resources. People are there. How do we make sure? Because maybe it's a taboo for a young person to go to a facility, but how do we use that at that point to then change so that Barwani was already here, he's already in the room, you're going to see him, we're going to see her for formal visits. How do we use those formal visits? And I think we've also seen where, as Nissily said, where you have community health workers that work and support youth organizations or youth groups. But also in that case, we're seeing young people who are able to articulate their issues in a way that makes designing of programs change, but also policies that then react to those findings change. So for me, I think I'm still waiting for the time where like a boy and a girl, before they have sex, like the girl will be like, do you have a condom? And the guy will be like, did we consider like a long acting or other method of contraception? So yes, we're looking at the other side, but also that they have that decision of, do we want to have sex now? How do we want to have sex? I want it to be pleasurable for me. Can we come back to the table? So I feel like these conversations are what we can build on, but definitely there are platforms, and also there's like a young network for young people that looks at SRH that has been strong on, that never used to exist, but now can say, we've seen A, but can we move to B and can we build on? And I think we need those high impact practices that focus on the underserved and under-targeted best. Thanks.
Thank you. And so I guess my question is, what is B? What are you excited for when it comes to the future of family planning and SRHR in Malawi or globally?
For Malawi right now, what we're looking at is we've given information to young people. They have this information, though sometimes the information is mixed up. But also when you look to the spaces where young people are coming from, especially in the rural areas, there is a lot of misinformation, miscommunication, but also the traditions and cultures that would actually, and beliefs that would hinder young people from actually accessing or utilizing family planning. So I think as a country, there's still a lot of advocacy that needs to be done, but also that information, education, and communication to our young people. Because as Barwani has pointed out, when it comes to the 2030 goals for Malawi, even the 2020 goals that we have, the focus is on young people. So even for us to actually reach our goals, our family planning goals as a country, we are relying on the young people. And then on the other hand, apart from that, yes, access and utilization is increasing, but there's a part whereby we need to move the young people from the short-term methods. How do we actually move them to the long-term methods? So that once in a while, I know you come across a young girl, she's pregnant, then you ask them, okay, what went wrong? Sometimes they'll tell you, okay, I was using this type of method, and then I decided maybe to quit, or the last time I went to a facility to get, they didn't have it, so I stopped for a short time, and then, well, I am pregnant. How do you actually stop that? So that's where the part I'm saying, moving them from the short-term to long-term acting methods, that would be very helpful for them. I think to my part, that is the issue that we still need to look at and focus on. Once our young people actually get this right, they have this information right, their access to long-term, long-acting methods is actually there, and they're able to actually use it. So even for Malawi, we're going to improve our situation. Thank you.
So I would say the B, my name starts with a B. I'm just kidding. But the B is making sure and working together to, I think, build on the work that has been laid, but to ensure that when we talk about sex, sexuality, and relationships with young people, these conversations are open, they are safe, that these are, pleasure is seen as essential, but also that we're able to make sure that this conversation, we're having it at early age. So it's age appropriate, but we're responding to the young person as they grow, because every young person will ask you, oh, so what is sex? But that parents or people in their circle are equipped to answer them, but also they are able to seek the information, so that the information seeking is paired in a way that it's able to capacitate them. So I know that it's always easy to say people should have agency, and I feel like it's a word we throw around. But for me, I think the thinking is, how do we make sure that the sex and sexuality and relationships are able to achieve ideal experiences, and they prevent or minimize negative experiences. So at that time, that those conversations at the beginning, they tackle the concerns, but also risk informed, but from saying, what do you want? What choices do you want? So in a sense, we're already informing it and keeping it central to the adolescents or the young person and their needs and their context. But then we're building onto that to say, okay, if this is your decision, then do you know that this could be like the services you can seek? If you're not comfortable going here, or there's somebody in your neighborhood who can come to you. There are young people that work at community level. How do we then link them? How do we make sure they are aware of also these linkages? Oh, you do not want the young person. Okay, there's a health worker who might be older, but they're great with young people. They can have a conversation. If you're not sure, we can come back and deal with that more. So for me, it's making sure that we're having open conversation, but also being able to bring our young people through that they're exposed to comprehensive sexuality education that's appropriate and starts early. So intervenes when they need it. So you don't wait for somebody to be 16 and to already be having sex, and then you tell them, oh, don't explore. But we want to intervene when they're asking and maneuvering and deciding, but be it in a sense that they can practice their positions of power, or they can tell you, I do not feel powerful enough to decide. And you can say, why don't you feel like this? Or have you considered this? So I feel like we need to enhance that, but also focus this for those young people we seem to be missing, and maximize opportunities that are missed. So I think here, I'll just refer back to the beginning when I talked about, we have young people that come for antenatal, but we also have young people that the investment now, we know it comes here, but does our investment go to the right stage? So our investment might be going to family planning or SRH, but it's only going to somebody that has had 2 children. So if you're in Malawi, you're like in your mid-20s. So how do we make sure that that investment gets lower? How do we make sure that that investment is also clear for early on adolescents, young parents? How do we make sure we're teaching young people, or they're coming to the table and also learning on how to explore and navigate relationships? And I think just one last thing is, we have seen that there's that the investments have paid off to young people who can advocate and work towards this. But what seems to be limited now is to really focus on high impact practices of what we work, to make sure that if, for example, Barwani and Nissily are like, we are proposing this project, people can come in and say, oh, you know, in this sector, we know that if you're proposing this, you already need to make sure, like, you consider this, because it's been proven to work. So we need that to also standardize those experiences and make sure that those gains are not just to other young people or adolescents, but they're at a scope that we gain also as a country as a whole and learn. Back to you, Jordan.
I think with those visions, we would be in a very good place globally. And I think you both have made a very good point when you talked about your journeys when it comes to CSC and family planning and sexually reproductive health. It's not just about family planning. It impacts education, it impacts the economy, gender-based violence. So I think you both have made a very good point, and I just want to reiterate your point, that it's not just about family planning when we talk about CSC and access to contraceptives and things like that. Wonderful. So my final question, so we're almost at time. So I wanted to open it up to you two to see if there were any questions you wanted to ask each other, any additional information you wanted the audience to know.
I have a question though. Actually, I said that to myself and I started laughing. I'm like, Jordan, please. But so Nissily has a child. So I would say, what would you want to see for Crystal, and how does that change how you see sex, sexuality, and relationships?
Okay, that's very funny. But yeah, having a a girl child. With historically, as parents, we never used to talk about this. Okay, our parents never used to talk to us about family planning, about sex, nothing like that. But I think with Crystal, that's my daughter, I would want to start this a bit earlier when she can understand these things. I know in school they start teaching them the basics, and or I would want to actually support through her education as the school is giving her information. But also I want her to be able to come to me and ask, and so that I can give her pointers where I can. So being able to actually have that, because I have colleagues who have kids who are like 13 now. They're almost reaching their puberty menses along, and they keep on coming to me and say, I'm so scared. I don't know what I'm going to talk to them. I'm like, you haven't started these discussions yet? They're like, no, I can't. How do I do that to she's my own child, because with our cultures and traditions, we want to send the child. For instance, in this case, Barwani, I send her to you when she's 13, which is, like you said, it's a bit too late at that point. So starting with them when they're still younger, but also creating that space so that they should be able to come to me with questions, or I should be able to talk with her freely, though she's my daughter, without thinking, oh, I need to send her to someone else to give her the information. Yeah.
Nissily for president again.
I would vote. I agree. I think you both have demonstrated that you are not only role models or really great champions when it comes to this space, that you have a very clear voice and perspective, and are able to stay strong in that voice. I'm curious if you have advice for other up-and-coming champions or leaders or youth advocates in this space. What advice would you give to them when it comes to navigating these conversations, the challenges that come along with working in this field?
I think mine is maybe like a 3-point. That sounds so dramatic, but it's not that long. I think one so if anybody's at their journey, even in the middle, things that have really been helpful for me is understanding that where you are, you will transition. So I see this as a two-sided coin. I feel like a lot of people who are young people who are advocates or activists give so much of themselves to the process, which is great. However, how much of that process is being fed back to them? So here is to say, if you're in a space, how do you map to make sure that you're transitioning? Because if you're an adolescent or young person, you're going to transition, and how does that work? So always imagine that when you're coming into the space, you are advocating, for all these things, but how do you see yourself also moving? So something that's helpful is to have people or mentors that are intentional with your growth. So as you advocate, they'll ask you to see where you are, to say, okay, what next? How does this align? How is this impactful? How can we learn from it? Also, then how can you mentor the other people below you? If you had asked me this before COVID, my next step my next point would be there, but maybe not as clear. I would say, be mindful, protect yourself. Here, I also mean that young people tend to overextend themselves. They give to self, they give to country, which is great, but be mindful of how much you can take on. Be mindful of how you come to the table. Be mindful of what you're saying yes to. No is a full sentence, and it's okay to say no to things. And also, if you take care of yourself, like wellness, you will do more for others. So just being like looking at that from all the things, from all the sides is helpful. And I feel like creating a safe space and building skills really helps, because I feel like those are things that have like worked for me. I would say in my life, I'm a chameleon. It's more of, it's the skills that I learned one way that you're able to apply in your journey. So come to the table open. Somebody already created, I feel like in the Malawi context, somebody has put the chair. Come in. Know that you also are carrying others behind you. Come prepared. If you need to ask maybe people you consult them to say, I have this opportunity coming up. I have this idea. Can I pass it through you? Maybe we can clean it up more. I'm meeting with these people. What do you think aligns? Because they're saying the same thing, but sometimes just packaging to your audience. So also to be able to package and align that so that you're making best impact and creating more room, that now when you're sitting at the table, you're not just sitting because it looks like it's what we needed. We needed to set an extra seat on the table because we're mandated to. But even when you leave, people will say, this seat should always be here, even if this person is not here, because this voice, this contribution, this value is needed. And also being able to agree to disagree, but acknowledging what people are doing and saying, okay, I might not agree with you, and this is where I'm coming from, but how do we meet in the middle to make sure that we can create better and definitely do better as well?
That is all excellent advice. I am taking notes because I am still learning how to put all that advice into practice. And I definitely encourage any young person working in the space, even non-young people. That's excellent advice. Nissily, do you have any advice for a young champion, a young family planning leader that you would lend them?
Having or building those meaningful or profitable relationships with others in your field works much better, so that you're not taking on everything on yourself, but you know that you have partnership that you can rely on, that you can learn from, but also that you could actually work together, holding hands together to actually achieve your objectives in this cycle, because one person cannot do everything.
Yeah.
For young people and adolescents who are champions, you are seen, you are appreciated, your voice matters, you're doing great. Take a moment to lean back and appreciate what you've done and celebrate your wins. I just wanted to really emphasize and acknowledge that part. So that was me clapping.
Thank you. I don't know if I can close in. I don't think I can say anything that's better than that. I think it's an amazing way to close this out. Well, thank you both so much for joining us. This has been a really inspiring conversation, is how I would take away from it. I have definitely enjoyed learning about not only your Ingenuity Fund project, but your journeys and your passion and your vision for, especially for Malawi and the family planning space. I am excited to see all the updates and hear more about the storytelling for impact that comes along with your Ingenuity Fund project, and just seeing all the great work that you both are doing. So this closes out our 12th episode of Candid Conversations. Thank you all for joining us and tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can know when the next episode goes up. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Yay, thank you.
Yay, thank you.